In the summer of 63 BC, Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus stood at the entrance to a small, dark room at the heart of Jerusalem, and made a decision that would echo for 2 centuries. The room was the Holy of Holies, the innermost sanctuary of the temple, the place where Jewish belief held that God's presence resided. No one entered it except the high priest, and even he only once a year on Yom Kippur. Pompey walked in anyway. What he found astonished him. The room was empty. No statue, no idol, no treasury of gold, just empty space. According to Josephus, Pompey emerged without touching a single thing, and expressly forbade his soldiers from looting the temple. He had the sacred rites reinstated, and the priests returned to their duties. He went back the next day. From a Roman perspective, Pompey had been remarkably restrained. From a Judean perspective, the violation was total. The most sacred space in the world had been entered by a foreign general on a visit of curiosity. That moment, in miniature, is the story of Rome and Judea. This episode in the Judea series asks a single question. Why was this relatively small and economically modest province so persistently difficult to govern?
This video is sponsored by you. Unfortunately, the YouTube environment is not great right now, with the algorithm being friendlier to drama and React channels, and YouTube being permissive of AI slop. We don't do drama and we don't do AI, but thanks to our members and patrons, our channel continues to make 3 public videos per week, with the team intact and going strong. In recognition of their generosity and contributions, members and patrons receive 2 additional exclusive videos each week, and access many other perks. Join them to watch more than 250 exclusive videos covering every era of history. Join them by scanning the QR code on your screen, via the links in the description or pinned comment, or by pressing the join button under the video.
No other province in the Roman Empire created quite the same problem as Judea, and the reason is not complicated, even if the consequences were enormous. Rome built its empire on a specific model. Incorporate local elites, leave local customs largely intact, add a layer of imperial administration on top, and collect taxes. This worked almost everywhere. In Egypt, Gaul, Spain, and Asia Minor, local aristocracies found that working with Rome was more profitable than fighting against it. The gods of the conquered were absorbed into the Roman pantheon, or, at a minimum, tolerated alongside it. A soldier in Vindolanda could worship both Roman and Celtic gods without any contradiction, because Roman religion was additive by design. One could honor local deities while participating in broader imperial rituals. Religious flexibility was not just permitted, it was expected. Jewish religious law made this model unworkable from the start, and not because the Jewish population was uniquely difficult, but because the 2 systems were genuinely incompatible. Judaism, in the Second Temple period, was strictly monotheistic. And that monotheism was not merely theological, it was legal, social, and political simultaneously. The Torah was both a relationship with God and the governing law of the community. The temple was both a place of worship and the institutional seat of legitimate authority. The Sabbath was both a religious observance and the organizing rhythm of commercial and civic life. None of these could be separated out so that Roman civic religion could sit alongside them without conflict. The clearest illustration of this incompatibility occurred in 39 AD, when the Emperor Caligula, offended by Jewish communities in Alexandria who refused to erect statues in his honor, ordered a colossal gilded statue of himself to be erected inside the temple in Jerusalem. The governor of Syria, Publius Petronius, was dispatched with 2 legions to carry out the order. He was met by tens of thousands of Jews who told him plainly they would rather die than permit the temple to be desecrated. Josephus describes them abandoning their harvests and lying prostrate before the Roman troops. Petronius stalled for nearly 2 years, writing to Caligula that enforcing the order would require killing most of the population of the province. Caligula responded by ordering Petronius to commit suicide. The statue was never erected. Caligula was assassinated in January 41 AD before the message reached its destination. The crisis passed, but it had demonstrated, in the starkest possible terms, what happened when Roman religious demands met Jewish religious law. There was no middle ground. A similar pattern had already played out under the prefect Pontius Pilate, who introduced a set of gilded shields bearing the name of Tiberius into Jerusalem. Jewish leaders demanded their removal as a violation of the prohibition on graven images in sacred spaces. When Pilate refused, a delegation bypassed him and appealed directly to the emperor. Tiberius ordered the shields moved to Caesarea. Pilate had overplayed his hand, and the Roman administrative system had corrected for it. But the episode illustrated a cycle that would repeat itself with diminishing patience on both sides. The religious tension was deepened by a political one. Judea was a province with a recent, living memory of successful independence, and that memory never faded. In 167 BC, the Seleucid king Antiochus IV Epiphanes attempted to forcibly Hellenize Judea. He abolished Jewish law, prohibited the Sabbath, banned circumcision, and desecrated the temple with a statue of Zeus and a sacrifice of pigs on the altar. The response was the Maccabean Revolt, led first by the priest Mattathias and then by his son, Judas Maccabeus. Within 3 years, Judas had retaken Jerusalem and rededicated the temple, an event commemorated by Hanukkah to this day. By 141 BC, under Judas's brother Simon, Judea had achieved formal independence from the Seleucids for the first time in over 4 centuries. The Hasmonean dynasty that followed governed a genuinely powerful independent state. At its height, under Alexander Jannaeus, from 103 to 76 BC, it controlled territory stretching from Gaza to the Transjordan, roughly equivalent to the biblical Kingdom of David. This was not ancient history by the time Roman legions arrived. It was within living memory. What was established in Judean political culture was a template that never fully disappeared. Independence was achievable. A native Jewish ruling house had existed, and religious identity and political sovereignty were not just compatible but inseparable. When Pompey intervened in a Hasmonean civil war in 63 BC, exploiting a dispute between 2 brothers, Hyrcanus and Aristobulus, to justify extending Roman authority eastward, he faced a 3-month siege before the Temple Mount fell. Josephus records 12,000 Jewish dead. Rome had arrived in Judea, but not easily, and unlike most of its conquests, it would never entirely consolidate. For a time, indirect rule through client kings offered a workable compromise. Herod the Great, who governed from 37 to 4 BC, was a remarkable political operator. He rebuilt the temple on a monumental scale, visible across Jerusalem, kept the population fed, managed Roman expectations, and generally held the arrangement together through force of personality and considerable brutality. After his death, the kingdom was partitioned among his sons, and within a decade the Romans dispensed with client kingship altogether, placing Judea under direct administration by prefects and procurators of equestrian rank, men who would be sent from Rome for fixed terms, without deep knowledge of the province they governed. The structural problem was not simply cultural insensitivity, though individual governors contributed to the catastrophe in their own distinctive ways. The deeper issue was that Judea lacked the mediating elite that made Roman provincial administration function elsewhere. In most provinces, a Romanized local aristocracy emerged that bridged imperial administration and the local population. In Judea, the closest equivalent was the temple aristocracy, the Sadducees, but their cooperation with Rome depended entirely on Rome leaving the temple alone. When governors touched the temple's finances or introduced imagery into sacred spaces, that mediating layer did not bend, it collapsed. Cumanus, governor from 48 to 52 AD, managed to provoke a stampede at the temple during Passover, when a soldier made an obscene gesture towards the assembled crowd, killing thousands. His subsequent mishandling of a separate communal attack on Jewish pilgrims, during which he allowed his troops to loot a Jewish village, compounded the disorder. He was eventually recalled to Rome and exiled. His successor, Antonius Felix, combined ruthless suppression of brigandage with a systematic failure to address its political causes. Under Felix, the Sicarii emerged as an organized force, professional assassins named for the small, curved daggers they concealed beneath their cloaks, who targeted Romans and Jewish collaborators alike in broad daylight in public places. The final spark was Gessius Florus, governor from 64 AD. In May 66, Florus seized 17 talents of silver from the temple treasury, citing imperial needs. When crowds in Jerusalem responded by passing collection plates to mock the impoverished governor, Florus dispatched troops to sack part of the upper market. Josephus, characteristically direct, describes Florus as one who treated the Jews as though they had been provided for his personal enrichment. The revolt that followed was a direct product of this action, and the accumulated product of 60 years of the same pattern. Rome did not face a unified opposition. The internal divisions of Jewish society were in their own right a cause of instability, and Roman pressure intensified those divisions rather than resolving them. The Pharisees built their authority on legal and religious expertise, developing extensive traditions of interpretation that allowed Jewish law to function under foreign administration. The Sadducees, tied to the temple hierarchy, favored accommodation as long as Rome left the temple alone. The Essenes withdrew from public life entirely, forming regulated communities in the Judean desert that rejected both temple corruption and political compromise. The Zealots concluded that accommodation was itself a form of spiritual betrayal, and that armed resistance was not merely justified, but theologically necessary. These divisions became catastrophically visible during the siege of Jerusalem in 70 AD. Even as 4 Roman legions under Titus surrounded the city, 3 separate Jewish factions were fighting each other inside the walls. John of Gishala held the Temple Mount. Simon bar Giora controlled the upper city. Eleazar ben Simon occupied the inner court of the temple itself. The 3 factions burned each other's food stores during the siege. Josephus, writing from the Roman side by this point, describes the city consuming itself from within, even as it was attacked from without. Josephus himself is perhaps the most telling example of these internal fractures. A Jewish commander in Galilee who surrendered to Vespasian at Jotapata in 67 AD, and subsequently wrote the definitive account of the war from within the Roman camp. He is simultaneously our primary source for Jewish resistance and a man despised as a traitor by those he documented. But the best evidence we have for the Jewish side of this conflict comes from someone who switched sides mid-war, captures something essential about the nature of the conflict itself. Florus's seizure of the temple treasury triggered the Great Revolt. It became irreversible when Rome suffered one of its most embarrassing military defeats of the century. In November 66 AD, the legate of Syria, Cestius Gallus, marched on Jerusalem with the 12th Legion Fulminata and substantial auxiliary forces to suppress what was still, at that point, a provincial disturbance. He reached the walls of Jerusalem, advanced within range of the temple precincts, and then, for reasons Josephus cannot fully explain, ordered a retreat. The withdrawing Roman column was ambushed in the pass of Beth Horon by Jewish forces. 6,000 Romans were killed. The 12th Legion lost its eagle, a Roman legionary standard, captured by a force Rome had been calling bandits, was held in Judea for the next 4 years. The message that was sent across the eastern Mediterranean was not lost on anyone. Nero dispatched Vespasian with 3 legions and supporting forces, numbering somewhere around 60,000 men, to reduce Judea methodically. Vespasian spent 67 and 68 AD isolating Jerusalem, destroying Galilean resistance, and eliminating fortified positions one by one. The process was interrupted by the chaos following Nero's death in 68 AD. Vespasian eventually emerged as emperor himself in 69, and left the final reduction of Jerusalem to his son Titus. The siege of Jerusalem in 70 AD lasted 5 months. Inside the walls, the 3 factions fighting each other complicated the defense, even as the Romans demolished the outer walls and pressed towards the temple. The temple burned on the 9th of Av, the same date on which, according to tradition, the first temple had been destroyed by the Babylonians in 586 BC. Whether that coincidence reflects reality or the shaping hand of later tradition, it was not lost on the people who lived through it. Josephus claims 1.1 million people died during the siege and its aftermath, and that 97,000 were taken captive. Modern estimates are considerably lower, but the destruction was catastrophic by any measure. The Arch of Titus, still standing in Rome, shows the temple menorah being carried in triumph through the city's streets. Even so, the destruction of the temple did not produce the stabilization that Rome had hoped for. The institution that Rome removed was precisely the one that had previously focused and moderated Jewish political life. Without the temple, without the Sadducees, whose authority depended on it, without the elaborate hierarchy of temple administration, Jewish religious life reorganized itself around decentralized legal and rabbinic authority, a form that was, if anything, harder to suppress or co-opt than the old institutional structure had been. The Bar Kokhba Revolt of 132 to 135 AD demonstrated how little the underlying conditions had changed. Unlike the Revolt of 66 AD, which began in disorder and rapidly fragmented, the uprising led by Simon ben Kasiba was organized from the start. Bar Kokhba, son of a star, a messianic title given to him by Rabbi Akiva, minted his own coins, dated to the years of the redemption of Israel and the freedom of Jerusalem. He appointed civil officials, managed supply lines, and maintained communications across the province. Documents recovered from the Judean desert, actual administrative letters from Bar Kokhba's headquarters, show a commander who signed orders, requisitioned supplies, and reprimanded subordinates for failing to send Shabbat provisions to their troops. This wasn't a bandit uprising, it was a state in waiting. Hadrian's response was to pull Julius Severus, his best available general, from the British frontier and to visit the province himself. The campaign took 3 years. Cassius Dio notes that during this period, Hadrian departed from his good practice of opening letters to the Senate with the phrase, "I and the army are in good health." He had his reasons for the omission. The eventual Roman suppression came at considerable human and financial cost. Hadrian's subsequent measures were designed to sever the connection between the Jewish people and the land itself. Jerusalem was refounded as Aelia Capitolina, a Roman colony with a temple to Jupiter built on or near the site of the destroyed temple. Jews were barred from entering on pain of death, permitted only to approach the walls once a year to mourn. The province was renamed Syria Palestina, deliberately erasing the name Judea entirely from the administrative map. These were not simply administrative decisions, they were an attempt to make the geography itself carry a different political meaning. Judea's instability under Roman rule was not the product of administrative incompetence, though governors like Florus contributed significantly to the outcome. Nor was it simply the refusal of an unusually difficult population to accept conquest. It was the product of genuine structural mismatch between an imperial system built on flexible integration and a society whose foundations could not be integrated without being destroyed. Rome's model assumed that authority, religion, and identity were separable. In Judea, they were not. What appeared to Roman administrators as routine fiscal or civic decisions were understood locally as attacks on the foundations of communal life. What looked like political resistance was experienced as religious duty. Rome could suppress the revolts, and it did, repeatedly and at great cost. What it could not do was address the conditions that produced them. If you want to understand what happens when an irresistible administrative apparatus encounters an identity structure that cannot accommodate it, Judea is your case study. We'll continue exploring Rome's troubled eastern provinces in future episodes. If you don't want to miss those, and many other historical videos, please make sure you're subscribed and have pressed the bell button. Please consider liking, subscribing, commenting, and sharing. It helps immensely. Our patrons and YouTube members have access to exclusive content. Consider joining their ranks via the link in the description or the button under the video. To watch these weekly videos, learn about our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our private Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we'll catch you on the next one.